At 3:47 this afternoon, Chief Justice John Roberts gavelled the Senate into session for what would become the most historic vote in American history. He addressed the chamber with these words: "The question is, shall the president be convicted on the articles of impeachment?" Senators will vote aye or nay. The clerk will call the roll. In that moment, the room went absolutely quiet. 100 senators sat at their desks, 67 votes needed for conviction, and over the next 17 minutes, as each name was called and each senator responded with guilty or not guilty, the numbers began painting an unmistakable picture. At 4:04 p.m., the clerk submitted the final tally to Chief Justice Roberts. Rising to his feet as the chamber held its collective breath, Roberts delivered a verdict unlike any ever spoken in this nation's history. On this vote, the ayes are 68, the nays are 32. 2/3 of the senators present having voted guilty, the president is convicted on all articles of impeachment. Under the Constitution of the United States, the president is removed from office effective immediately. The reaction was immediate and electric. Some senators rose to their feet, applauding, while others sat frozen in disbelief. Then, at 4:07 p.m., just 3 minutes after Chief Justice Roberts declared him removed, the president took to social media directly from the White House with this statement: "The Senate vote is illegitimate and void. I do not accept this conviction. I remain President of the United States. I will continue executing my duties, and I will not leave the White House." If you're just joining this channel, I need you to hit that subscribe button immediately, because what I'm about to walk you through represents not the conclusion of this constitutional crisis, but rather the opening chapter of its most dangerous phase. The Senate has removed a sitting president, yet that president flatly refuses to acknowledge his removal. For the coming hours, or perhaps days, the United States will find itself with two individuals claiming the presidency, with absolutely no clear constitutional mechanism for determining who legitimately holds the office. Turn on notifications right now, set them to all, because what unfolds in the next 24 hours will decide whether American democracy emerges from this crisis intact, or whether we've entered an era of constitutional collapse where removal from office becomes meaningless when the removed president possesses enough power to resist. Let me take you inside that vote, because examining the roll call reveals exactly which Republicans crossed party lines and why the total reached 68. At 3:47 p.m., the clerk began calling names in alphabetical order. Senator Baldwin of Wisconsin, a Democrat, voted guilty. Senator Barrasso of Wyoming, a Republican, voted not guilty. The pattern continued for roughly 15 minutes, but when the clerk reached McConnell of Kentucky, the chamber experienced a noticeable pause. Mitch McConnell, who had served as Senate Republican leader for 17 years, rose and delivered his verdict with unmistakable clarity: guilty on all three articles. The ripple effect was instantaneous. McConnell's vote essentially granted permission for other Republicans to follow suit, and they did exactly that. The 17 Republicans who cast guilty votes were Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, Mitt Romney of Utah, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Susan Collins of Maine, Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, Ben Sasse of Nebraska, Richard Burr of North Carolina, Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, Rob Portman of Ohio, Tom Tillis of North Carolina, Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia, Joni Ernst of Iowa, Mike Rounds of South Dakota, Todd Young of Indiana, John Thune of South Dakota, Roger Marshall of Kansas, and Cindy Hyde-Smith of Mississippi. Those final two names, Marshall and Hyde-Smith, caught virtually everyone off guard. Neither had given any public indication they would vote to convict, but both explained afterward that the evidence surrounding defiance of the Supreme Court proved simply disqualifying. When the tally was announced at 4:04 p.m., the mathematics stood undeniable. 51 Democrats and independents voted guilty. 17 Republicans voted guilty. Combined, they reached 68, exactly one more than the 67 required for conviction. The president stood convicted on Article 1, defying Supreme Court authority, convicted on Article 2, abuse of emergency powers, and convicted on Article 3, obstruction of justice. He now holds the distinction of being the first president in American history removed from office through Senate conviction. If you truly grasp the magnitude of this moment, hit that like button right now. The Senate just removed a sitting president. The algorithm determines what content breaks through, and you have the power to decide whether this analysis reaches the people who absolutely need to see it. I'm showing you a constitutional system attempting to enforce its most severe remedy for presidential misconduct. At 4:07 p.m., the president fired back. His social media post read, "The Senate vote is illegitimate and void. I do not accept this conviction. I remain President of the United States. I will continue executing my duties, and I will not leave the White House." Here's the truly chilling detail: that post was composed before the vote even concluded. He had prepared to reject the verdict before it was officially announced. Now we face the pressing question of whether anyone possesses the authority to compel his compliance. At 4:15 p.m., in a separate location away from the White House complex, the vice president took the oath of office as president. This acting president, whose authority under the 25th Amendment had been disputed but now stands confirmed through Senate conviction and removal, was sworn in by a federal judge. The oath included these words: "I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States." Under the Constitution, when a president is removed, the vice president automatically becomes president. That transfer technically occurred, but it happened inside a conference room at the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, adjacent to the White House rather than within the White House itself, because the former president currently occupies the Oval Office and refuses to vacate. At 4:23 p.m., the newly sworn president issued a formal statement. "The Senate has exercised its constitutional authority. I have taken the oath of office as president. I call on all federal employees and military personnel to recognize the constitutional chain of command. I call on the former president to respect the Senate's verdict and to vacate the White House immediately." That statement makes absolutely clear that the new president considers the former president's continued presence in the White House completely unlawful. Drop a comment right now and tell me, who do you genuinely believe is the president at this moment? The individual the Senate removed who refuses to leave, or the individual who was just constitutionally sworn in? I'm reading every single response because this exact question is what every federal employee and every military commander is currently asking themselves. At 4:34 p.m., Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle issued an emergency directive to all Secret Service personnel. I've obtained the exact text. Effective immediately, protective resources are assigned as follows. The individual sworn in as president at 4:15 p.m. is the president and receives full presidential protection. The individual removed from office by Senate conviction receives protection appropriate for former presidents. All agents are reminded of my testimony to the Senate that we protect the office of the presidency, not any individual. Agents will facilitate the lawful transition of power. This directive activates precisely what Cheadle promised in her congressional testimony. The Secret Service leadership is siding with the new president. But at 4:47 p.m., sources inside the White House reported that Secret Service agents assigned to the Presidential Protection Detail find themselves deeply divided. Some agents have departed the White House to join the new president's detail. Others have remained with the former president. The split is anything but clean. And for the first time in American history, Secret Service agents find themselves on opposing sides of a dispute over who legitimately requires protection. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now, because what I'm about to show you involves how the military, federal agencies, and foreign governments are responding to this unprecedented situation of two people claiming the presidency. At 5 p.m., the chairman of the Joint Chiefs sent a message to all military commanders. The Senate has convicted and removed the president. Under the Constitution, the vice president becomes president upon removal. The chain of command is now through the individual sworn in at 4:15 p.m. All military personnel are to recognize the constitutional chain of command. Any orders from the individual removed from office are not lawful and will not be obeyed. The military has made its choice. They are following the new president. But at 5:15 p.m., the former president posted again. The military works for the commander-in-chief. I am the commander-in-chief. The Senate conviction was illegitimate. Any military personnel who follow orders from the individual falsely claiming to be president are committing mutiny and will be court-martialed. That represents a direct threat to service members who choose to follow the chairman's guidance. At 5:34 p.m., the acting attorney general, who had been appointed by the former president before the 25th Amendment dispute began, announced his resignation. I can no longer serve in a position where the legitimacy of executive authority is disputed. I resign effective immediately. Within the hour, the heads of the FBI, DEA, ATF, and U.S. Marshals Service all announced they recognize the new president as the lawful executive. The Justice Department has chosen its side. At 6:02 p.m., the new president held a brief press conference. I am the President of the United States. The Senate has spoken. The Constitution has been followed. I call on the former president to leave the White House peacefully. If he does not, I have directed the U.S. Marshals Service to facilitate his departure. I do not want this to be resolved through force, but the rule of law must be upheld. That statement represents the new president explicitly saying the marshals will remove the former president if necessary. At 6:17 p.m., U.S. Marshals arrived at the White House Northwest Gate, the very same gate where they were blocked on February 12th. This time, they're not serving a court order, they're executing a presidential directive. The new president has ordered the removal of the former president, and the marshals stand prepared to carry it out. But at 6:23 p.m., Secret Service agents still assigned to the former president informed the marshals they will not permit entry. The standoff from February 12th is essentially repeating itself, but now the stakes have grown exponentially higher. The marshals are acting under orders from the person who is constitutionally the president. The Secret Service agents are protecting someone who is constitutionally a former president, but who refuses to accept that status. Here's what we're watching for over the next 24 hours, 6 indicators that will tell us how this ultimately resolves. Indicator 1. Does the former president leave voluntarily? If he simply walks out on his own, the crisis de-escalates significantly. If he barricades himself, it escalates dramatically. Indicator 2, do Secret Service agents at the White House follow Director Cheadle's directive and stand down? If they allow marshals to enter, removal happens peacefully. If they resist, we face a physical confrontation between federal law enforcement agencies. Indicator 3, do any military units act independently if commanders split on who to obey? That would fracture military cohesion. Indicator 4, does Congress take any action to support the new president? If the House and Senate issue statements recognizing the new president, it provides crucial political backing. Indicator 5, do foreign governments recognize the new president? If allies make statements, it adds international pressure on the former president to leave. Indicator 6, does the former president's support collapse when it becomes clear he cannot govern? If cabinet members resign, if agencies refuse his orders, if he loses the ability to function, he may conclude that resistance is futile. Let me outline the 3 possible scenarios. Scenario 1, the former president leaves within 24 hours. Faced with isolation, with the Secret Service divided, with the military refusing orders, with agencies abandoning him, he simply walks out. He'll claim he's being forced out illegally, but he'll comply to avoid physical removal. This represents the face-saving departure scenario. Scenario 2, the former president is physically removed. The U.S. Marshals, with Secret Service cooperation after Cheadle's directive takes full effect, enter the White House and escort him out. There's no violence, but the images of a former president being removed by federal agents become the defining moment of the entire crisis. This is the enforcement scenario. Scenario 3, the former president successfully resists. Secret Service agents refuse to follow Cheadle. The marshals cannot enter. The military splits, with some units recognizing the new president and others the former. The government operates with 2 competing executives. This is constitutional collapse. Subscribe right now, like this video, comment with your prediction. Which scenario actually happens? I'm tracking all 3. And as events continue to unfold, you'll see the analysis here immediately. Let me explain why this has never happened before. The Senate has held 3 presidential impeachment trials prior to today. Andrew Johnson in 1868 was acquitted by a single vote. If he had been convicted, there was absolutely no question he would have left office. Bill Clinton in 1999 was acquitted. Donald Trump in 2020 was acquitted. Trump in 2021 was acquitted. In none of those cases did a conviction occur, and in none of those cases did anyone seriously suggest the president would refuse to accept the verdict. Today, for the first time, the Senate actually convicted. 68 senators voted guilty. The president is constitutionally removed, yet he refuses to accept it. And now the country confronts the fundamental question of how to enforce removal when the removed president maintains enough support and enough resources to resist. What I know with absolute certainty right now, the Senate voted 68 to 32 to convict. 17 Republicans joined all Democrats. Chief Justice Roberts declared the president removed. The vice president was sworn in as president. The former president refuses to accept removal and remains physically inside the White House. The Secret Service is divided. The military has chosen the new president. The Justice Department has chosen the new president. U.S. Marshals are at the White House gate attempting to execute a removal order, and Secret Service agents are actively blocking them. This represents the constitutional crisis reaching its absolute maximum point. The system worked, the Senate convicted, but the enforcement mechanism is now being severely tested. If the former president can remain in the White House despite Senate conviction, despite being sworn out and replaced, despite federal law enforcement attempting to remove him, then Senate conviction means absolutely nothing. The impeachment power exists in the Constitution, but it cannot be enforced against a president who simply refuses to comply. The next 24 hours will reveal whether the United States remains a nation where constitutional processes can constrain executive power, or whether we've learned that power, once seized and held with sufficient determination, cannot be dislodged by votes or procedures, or even by 2/3 of the Senate declaring removal. What happens at the White House gate tonight and tomorrow will answer that question definitively, and that answer will define what kind of country we truly are. Stay with this channel. Turn on notifications. When the standoff resolves, when the former president either leaves, is removed, or successfully resists, you'll see the analysis here immediately. This is far from over. This is the Senate exercising the most serious constitutional remedy available, and a former president declaring that remedy simply does not apply to him. One of those positions will ultimately prevail, and which one prevails determines whether American democracy survived its greatest test.